Good afternoon. My name is Demar Steen. This is my presentation for advanced writing. And the topic is the impact of a coup d'etat and a massacre on American political memories and cultural identities. Let's jump into it. First, we start with 1898. In 1898 was a time in which, after the Civil War, African Americans had some rights. There was an attempt to include African Americans in the build of this country, if you will. Essentially, that kind of changed during this time frame as well. During the Wilmington coup, it was a violent overthrow of African American political leaders, disenfranchising Black voters, and dismantling their political power in North Carolina. And we will speak on how that also reached far beyond North Carolina as well during that time. So we're starting. Remember, we're starting in 1898. We're starting in a particular time, so we want to address that first. The Wilmington coup and a political, or excuse me, a pivotal moment in the emphasis of violence and erosion of the African American political power in the United States, particularly because you have the idea that on election day in 1898, African Americans were not only ran away from the polls but ran out of town, were killed, were victims essentially in a brutal capacity simply for attempting to exercise a right. This is where it gets very interesting because according to PBS, they say that the overall number of voters, Black voters during that time, was around 50 to 60,000. The next election after, which was 1902, you have a sharp decline of African American voters going from nearly 50,000 to about 4,000. And particularly because of not just Wilmington, but other areas where the same things were happening, just not highlighted in this manner on this topic. First, if you recall us attempting to connect the dots of the coup as a time period, we have to look at the players involved. Rebecca Felton, according to the U.S. Senate's website, is the first woman senator. Her role was to start her role in this. Excuse me. She was a starter of this essentially. She called for the hanging of African American males publicly in a editorial, which was published in several states. And then you have on the other side of the fence, you have Alex Manley, who was a African American who owned a newspaper editorial as well, and he essentially responded to Rebecca Folting, very powerfully and very honest during that time frame, which was a problem for African Americans. So essentially, the pressure became put on Alex Manley, which his newspaper building was torched. He was also ran out of town, was unable to come back and pay taxes. He never returned to North Carolina after this incident. So let's get into some more players. We got Josephus Daniels, interesting fellow here. He was also a newspaper editor. He realized during that time, it's very interesting, that most of his white counterparts were unable to read during that time. And so he with his newspaper, began to do propaganda such as depicting African Americans in political positions as inferior, as monkeys, as anything that is below the idea of white supremacy. And that worked during the South at that time. And he himself was also complicit in the coup of 1898. He was framed. He worked. Excuse me. His work was framed politically as a participation threat to white. Excuse me. He framed his work as a excuse me. Whew. His work framed Black political participants as a threat to white rule. That's what I meant to say. I apologize. He also began to ascend in the political sphere. Served as the United States Secretary of the Navy from 1913 to 1921, and the ambassador in Mexico from 1933 to 1941, and under Franklin Delano Roosevelt maintained considerable national influence despite his role in that coup. Next, you have his counterpart, Alfred Waddell Moore, who's a congressman, 1871 to 1879. He actually became the mayor of Wilmington, so he had some kind of political rising as well during this time. He was a Confederate officer, emerged as a leading political voice in the white supremacy movement. During the coup, he delivered speeches urging white citizens to choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses if necessary to seize power. Following the violent overthrow of in Wilmington government and the expulsion of black leaders, Waddell was installed as the mayor, solidifying white control. His career reflected the broader shift from Reconstruction era to biracial democracy to codified segregation of the early 20th century. So remember, we are going from 1898 to 1921, and let's apply, understand, and analyze these things in correlation. And you have the political might stripped away in 1898. Next thing to do to silence a group of people would be economically. So the Tulsa massacre devastated the Greenwood district, destroying economic heart of black prosperity with the loss of homes, businesses, resulting in long-term financial repression for African Americans. So what happened in Black Wall Street, or what it's considered to be? It was the first aerial attack of its kind on U.S. soil. There's three key facts. That's one of them. Particularly targeting black prosperity. And the third is how the media and the framing from the media allowed justification for the events. So we have verified reports on these matters, and all of these are which are government entities. Oklahoma Commission to Study the Tulsa Race Riots, final report published in 2001. The Department of Justice, final report published in 2005. And the National Endowment of Humanities also did a piece on this as well. These are some that were used in my paper. These are not all, but these are verified sources that you can look up from the government that back up everything that I'm saying. So, the first of its kind. Uh, while residents fueled by false narratives and racial tension utilize private aircraft to drop incendiary devices on homes and businesses, leading to widespread destruction. This being done according to the DOJ report previously mentioned. Targeting of black people. We talked about this. This is also in the report, and the DOJ report and the Oklahoma Tulsa report. The attack was on predominantly black people, if not all black citizens. Essentially, this was a black district, so the bombing was central, or excuse me, the aerial attacks were essentially located in that district. So let's talk about the impact. How does this affect things, right? You have an incident, which is the Black Wall Street, or you have two. You have the coup, you have Black Wall Street. And in Black Wall Street, what happens, right? This is where we are now. So we have loss of life is never okay. First point to make. With that being said, we have an estimate. They don't know the number of lives that were lost. That's number one. That's according to the report as well. There were 35 blocks that were destroyed. They're estimated between 1 and 300 residents were killed, and loss of life was pretty bad. With that being said, we continue to the idea that insurance was not paying black people for their businesses, which caused a completely different set of problems because you rebuild with nothing. And this was a systematic thing. This is not according to me. This is, again, according to that DOJ report that we mentioned earlier. And then there was a systematic land acquisition and racial wealth gap. So essentially, when the businesses were burned down, nobody wants a burnt out business. So essentially, those businesses were bought then for the pennies of the dollar, majority by white developers who then essentially took the economic power from African Americans who built that district. So now we got to get into how the media is complicit in all of this. You have Rebecca Foden and Alex Manley. You have Josephus Daniels, both of whom are newspaper articles, and how their ideas of contorting media to portray African Americans a particular way was done extremely successfully. in a time where it wasn't hard to do that based on Josephus Daniels knowing that, hey, white people also can't read during that time frame, during that time period. And so again, using images and with racial undertones, the message got across very, very, very well in that time frame. So let's talk about the media justification for Tulsa. It was framed as a Negro uprising. So essentially, once again, giving the government the ability to justify the idea of an aerial attack on um, an African American community during that time. So remember, we're in 1921. We're jumping a little bit, so we want to look at the timeline from 1921 to roughly about the 60s, and in that timeline, you have the Jim Crow laws, which were enacted. Josephus Daniels had influence in that as well. Laws established a legal framework for racial segregation in the United States, enforcing culture and discrimination that perpetuated all aspects of life from education to employment. To industrialized racism not only marginalized African Americans socially, but also economically, limiting their access to resources and opportunities for advancement. So Jim Crow comes into play. Essentially, we are separate but equal, but the reality is that it was not equal. And so you have a wealth gap begin to grow. You have crime coming into the Black community because of that aspect, but it's all based on the idea of systematic suppression, systematic racism, if you will, and then systematic destruction, economic and physical violence against Black communities. Let's not forget and let's remember the fact that these two incidents are not isolated, and these were not the only incidents that happened during that time. So, from 1920 to 1940, we have a lot of those incidents that were occurring: the destruction of Black prosperity, the redistribution of wealth, so on and so forth. And so all of these things come into play. Remember, we're connecting the dots, and now we're going to get to the 60s. During the 60s, there was a great time for African Americans as it relates to political advancement. First, you got the Civil Rights Act, which aimed to end discrimination and systematic suppression of African Americans, right? It's a good thing. Nobody's mad about that one, right? Now, we have that, but then we also have, right, we have the Civil Rights Act to the landmark legislation outlawed discrimination against race, sex, religion, national origin, right? Aimed to end segregation in schools and workplace and in public accommodations. Then you have the Voters' Rights Act, right, which helped to equal the playing field as it relates to voting for African Americans, prohibit discrimination against voting, and help increase voter registration. During this time frame, you also have the administration of Lyndon Baines Johnson commissioning what will be known as the Kerner Report. And the Kerner Report essentially was a peek into the African American community and why uprest continually happen in this country, specifically in African American communities. And what they found was very astounding because they realized, and I quote, it is identified, the we are moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. It identified systematic racism, poverty, and police brutality as root causes of unrest, not random violence. The report called for sweeping reforms to housing, education, employment, and policy, but was ignored during that time. So the ignoring of the Kerner Report led to this idea that we now can have a war on drugs essentially, and we can take away voters' rights again. And let's not forget that the war on drugs is still going on, even though it's less uh, framed in the way it was in the 70s and 80s. So I say that to say the war on drugs begins, and then we have continued systemic racism. So following the achievements of those two, we then see mass incarceration, which upended all the gains that were during the civil rights, which led to mass incarceration, which led to voters' rights being taken away from African Americans, and this is where we are today. I want to thank you for your time. I apologize for the rush, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank